Shalom from Jerusalem. This is Israel at War, an update on TV7 Israel News. And this is the 327th day in which Israel is at war, starting last October the 7th, which means that in less than 6 weeks, we are going to mark the first anniversary of the war. And this is, of course, a matter of a heated debate within the Israeli society. How to do it, whether at all to have any events as long as at least 108 hostages, both alive and dead, are still in Gaza, and the war goes on in the north. Thousands upon thousands of residents, especially in the north, are still out of their homes. They have been displaced. And the two major stories in Israel over the last 24 hours have been the release of a Bedouin Israeli hostage, Farhan Kayed Muhammad El-Kadi. He was found in a tunnel in the southernmost part of Gaza by Israeli troops who were looking for hostages in the tunnel, but were not aware that he specifically was there. He heard them speaking in Hebrew, and they met him and released him. And the other story is a dragnet, an operation in the northern Samaria area in which Israel has battled terror cells and killed several terror operatives affiliated with Hamas, at least one of whom was released only last November in the first and only hostage release deal which was achieved at the time between Israel and Hamas. We are joined today with three distinguished brigadier generals in the Israeli Defense Forces, either on active reserve or still on the reserve roles. Brigadier General Dr. Amnon Sofrin, an intelligence professional, both with military intelligence and Mossad. Welcome, Dr. Sofrin.
Morning.
Brigadier General in the reserve, Relik Shafir, of the Israel Air Force, an ace, commanding squadrons and the base, and taking part in Iraq raid against the Iraqi reactor in 1981. Relik, you don't look like a relic. You're still very much with us.
Not at all, brand new.
And Brigadier General in the reserves, Doron Gavish, formerly the commanding general of the Israeli Air Force's Air and Missile Defense Command, and still on reserve duty in a similar capacity as the commander of the Israeli Air and Missile Defense Task Force. Welcome to you too, Doron.
Good day, Amnon.
General Gavish, let me ask you regarding your contacts, your meetings with various American officials recently. You have met with visitors both from the military and from Congress. What's your impression regarding their attitude towards Israel and specifically the Israeli Defense Forces?
Well, Amir, when it comes to militaries, and this is mainly what, of course, we do within our military, the relations are really probably the best as they were ever. We have a statement that we are using among us, and the statement goes like this. We say we are partners in peace and brothers in war. And this is exactly how do we treat each other, like brothers. We have to remember that the relations, mainly in the world of air and missile defense, the relations between Israel and the US forces is very tight. It started more than 30 years ago during the Gulf War, but then starting from Desert Shield, we are working very close together. Back then it was with EUCOM, in the last 2 years with CENTCOM. And what we are seeing is first, probably, and we talked about it more than once, the vast deployment that we saw in this area. And this is something that needs for a close coordination, for a close discussions among us and between the commanders, basically all levels. And this is something quite significant that we are seeing. And I think that the other thing which is significant, and we have to remember that once we are in the CENTCOM, we are looking on what is going around us from a regional point of view through CENTCOM, through the US forces. And this is something which is super important for Israel, enhance its defense. And we see it not only in a verbal way, also effectively. We've seen it on the 13th and the 14th of April. We are seeing it all along the war, mainly with those projectiles coming from the east. And there is a very tight intelligence correlation and coordination between the forces. So basically, we are working very close together, doctrine, posture of defense, and very close personal relations.
What about congressional visitors?
You know, those that are coming to Israel, of course, are the ones that are interesting to see what is going on in Israel. They're taking their time to come to Israel, and this is, of course, always very impressive. And you know, we feel the support of those that are coming to Israel. And once again, when you're talking about military posture, there is no question.
But this is the last point here, those congressional visitors who happen to have some military background, perhaps National Guard or Reserve, even if they were not in combat, do they show more sympathy towards serving officers, for instance?
Well, I'm not sure that I would say that it comes with their background. I think it's more relevant to their ideology. And I think it is more relevant to what we are all seeing. We are all understanding that at the end of the day, the destabilizer of this region is Iran. So they are very supported for the defense of Israel, but we are also always talking about what should we do, and from the Israeli point of view, of course, but not only from Israel point of view. Iran is really the issue that needs to be taken care of, probably the next thing that should be done here in the region.
General Shafir, you fighter pilots used to be the masters of the air. You had a monopoly on flying, but now there are also drones on both sides. General Gavish's air defense assets are at play, sometimes in more than one military, as was in mid-April. How do you control and choreograph this complex movement so that each particular component, the fighters, the air defense batteries, drones, helicopters, that each knows how to hit the target without colliding and without intercepting your own forces?
Well, in the Air Force, the close central command posts and intertwining the Air Force command fighters, interceptors with the air and space defense is a lot tighter than it used to be, exactly for the reasons that you mentioned, because the line of confrontation is becoming more and more complex, not just airplanes. We have the drones, the low-level drones that are so small that they do not emit heat, so that it's difficult to shoot them down with heat missiles. They fly so slow that and low level that it's almost impractical to shoot them with a gun from fighter aircraft. And so they need to be taken care of in such a manner that we don't hit our own forces when we shoot them. So the actual combined defense and the minute by minute coordination between the controllers and the sectors that are given to each type of weapon, such as guns, such as the Iron Dome, the radar signatures of the different elements, through training, coordination, and personal relationships between the officers who are commanding the systems from the central command. This has been a focus always for many, many years and a lot more now. And through the actual activities, it becomes better each time. But it needs to be said that we recognize that there is no tight security, and we have a hole, a strategic hole in the very small drones that carry about 5 kilos of munition, and we don't really have an effective way to shoot them down with the heat-seeking missiles. In the future, the laser-guided or the laser gun will be able to shoot them down, but still they could infiltrate between the tight border placings of those weapons. And so I would say that we have about 95% capability. And the way that Hezbollah at least has been trying to beat the defense is through masses and swarms. And every now and then, some of them do come through. That's one thing. I'll add a couple of points. One of them, there's no BDA for Hezbollah. They don't
That's
know
battle
what has
damage
happened
assessment.
to what they
Just
said.
to clarify, BDA, battle damage assessment.
Yes, that's one point. Another point is how much energy do you extend to those small drones that during an actual war have no military meaning, but during times like this, a war of attrition, it's a weapon of terror. And you have to expend a lot of energy to shoot them down. And we still haven't found a good way to answer that challenge.
But General Shafir, you talked about the centralized command and control of the Air Force, and obviously the operations staff at Air Force headquarters is very experienced, probably one of the best in the world, much like the pilots and other personnel. But Hezbollah has been claiming to have hit one of the ground control stations at Miron Mountain, not far from Safed. And the IDF spokesman has admitted that, but said that there was no damage and that the operations were not hurt. Can the Air Force operate in the north if such a base is being hit?
Let's take an example of an F-35 that flies in the air and it sees on its radar not only the targets, either airborne or on the ground, but the different airplanes that fly in the area are injected into his big screen so that he can see not only other airplanes, helicopters and such that fly around, but also the targets that are injected into his screen through the ground control. So, and it's not just the F-35. The F-35 is more advanced in its radar and control capability, so that the airplanes themselves can mesh the information between themselves. Another example is when when a pilot sees a target on the ground, let's say a drone, and he is not in a position to shoot it, it can actually designate the target with his helmet and relay it to another pilot, to the other pilot's helmet, very fast, so that a lot of targets can be handled at the same time. I don't want to go into the technical details, but this is what we call Generation 5 airplanes and control systems.
Thank you. And it seems as if the criticism lobbed at today's young generation for spending too much screen time is a bit overblown, because apparently they can make good use of these screens, at least when they are in the air. General Sofrin, thank you for your patience. You've been waiting, perhaps preparing even better answers than your brothers in arms. The prisoner
Because he's
released,
smarter.
whom I mentioned in my introduction, someone named Gabriel, seemingly it goes to show you that there's no point in such deals, because at least some of those terrorists revert to what they have done before they were captured and jailed. So in the balance, as you see it, is it still worthwhile to have such deals?
I'm sure that it is, because first of all, when this country has full responsibility of any resident or a soldier that is being kidnapped and held at the terrorist capacity, like Hamas or the other organizations surrounding him. And still, as long as we don't have any valid and plan that can be implemented to rescue them by military activity, there's no other way but to make some deal to release people that are imprisoned in Israel and to send them back to Gaza or elsewhere, maybe to an exile, and to bring all the people back home. Now, of course, there is the risk that these people will go back into terrorism, because that's what they know, that's what they have been doing all their grown-up lives, and they don't know anything else, and they have the wish to pay back to Israel on the time they spent at Israeli jail. But if you look at the percentage, I believe it is not more than 40 or 45% of these people that go back into terrorism. So you have to take this risk in order to release these people, because we have the full responsibility and we can't bring them home any other way.
Also, if Israel claims to have killed already 17,000 Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorists in Gaza, and they are still fighting, and they are probably recruiting more youngsters, then quantity-wise, it is not such a big number of prisoners released compared to the human reservoir that these terror organizations have.
I certainly agree with what you said, because if you look at Gaza today, the fact that Hamas was badly damaged militarily doesn't mean that Hamas is diminished. It's not. And they recruit young people from all over Gaza, and there are a lot of people that are willing to join the forces of Hamas. First of all, to get salary. Second, to take revenge of what happened during these 11 months, almost 11 months of war. And they wish to go back and join the fighting, and they're willing to do anything for that. So you can't calculate what we call to diminish Hamas only by counting the bodies. You know, in Vietnam War, General forgot his name. He was the commander
Westmoreland.
Westmoreland. Sorry, General Westmoreland, who commanded the forces in Vietnam, began in each of one of the engagements that the U.S. Army had with the Viet Cong to begin counting bodies and to calculate how many people are still valid. It doesn't have any meaning, because it's not that they destroyed 300 tanks and they left over only with 100 tanks. It's personnel. And still, and as long as they're fighting now in a guerrilla mode, that means that it doesn't have any meaning how many people are still alive, or how many people are still incapable of fighting, because they get out of the piers, they launch rockets, they launch side charges, and so on, and they have the ability to produce it by themselves right now. Since there are a lot of weapon systems that are left in Gaza, and a lot of explosives and a lot of bombs that didn't explode, that Israel threw out, and they made out of that a lot of weapon systems, a lot of side charges, and they engage us on a daily basis. And you see that almost every day now you receive what we call the bad message that somebody was killed in action or badly wounded. And that means that they still have the capacity, and this is the nature of guerrilla fighting. It can go on for many years, and you can't unroot it totally.
As long as we have a senior officer forum here, general officers of various arms and branches, I'd like to pose a question to all three of you, starting with you, General Gavish, and then General Shafir, and finally General Sofrin. Even as the IDF is fighting in Gaza, along the Lebanese border, and on other fronts, it must consider its build-up, whether it should revisit some basic ideas. Should it have, for instance, more air defense units, less of something else? What would be your recommendation, General Gavish, in that regard?
Well, Amir, this is a good question, because this is exactly what is happening within the IDF. By the way, not only the IDF, all the other organizations are doing the same. They are debriefing during the war itself all the time. There are lessons learned, which some of them are relevant to doctrine. Some of them are relevant to the personnel themselves and the way that they are working. Some of them are relevant to technology, and weapons is part of them. So there is a process of building the forces during the war itself. Unfortunately, it's a long war, so you have also time to do some of this. Of course, with regard to the air and missile defense, you discussed it before with General Shafir. The threats that we see, some of them, most of them, I would say, were intercepted in a very impressive way. There is a challenge with the very short-range UAVs, and this is something that is being discussed. There are lesson learned processes, as I said, with regard to the doctrine, but also with regard to some, let's put it this way, old weapons that are being brought back to the area that could be relevant to deal with those UAVs.
But would you recommend separating the Air and Missile Defense Command from the Air Force?
Not at all, never. I think that this is the advantage of the Israeli Air Force and the air defense. Once again, as we discussed before, the air picture is a combined picture, and today it's even much more than it was in the past. Everyone sees everyone, or everyone sees whatever the other is seeing. There is a very close coordination, and whatever is happening in the air should be controlled by the Air Force. I have no doubts about it. Also, when it comes to a very short range, we have to remember that this is a profession. To be a pilot or to be an air defense warrior, this is a profession, and I don't think that you could outsource it. So from my point of view, there is no question of that.
General Shafir, could you condense your advice in 1 minute?
It is quite clear that this is not a war. What we are experiencing is a challenge of terrorism against Israel. It's not a war. There are no tanks. There are no air forces on the other side, and we should be very careful. But it is clear that there are not enough infantry units in the IDF. The reserve ones are too sparse and should be consolidated. Not enough soldiers on the whole, and obviously the coordination. And I'm sorry, obviously there's not enough munition in the munition depots, and this should be revised as well. I hope that's enough for 60 seconds.
General Sofrin, you have been not only a senior officer in the various intelligence branches, but also you served as an intelligence officer and a soldier in the ground forces. You were wounded in combat. Do you agree with your fellow officers?
I agree, of course, and I will add two more short points. The first one is the intelligence corps should be revised and adapt a new doctrine and a new method of how to detect the enemies, this kind of enemies or rivals, intentions and capacity, and to be able to predict and to give the early warning. That's a second is, of course, the ground forces maneuvering units that should be enlarged and will enable us to at least be able to carry out operations on at least two theaters, meaning, let's say, for the time being, at Gaza and at Lebanon's border simultaneously, and not be dependent on the release of one unit from there to be removed to the northern part and then to be able to fight there.
General Sofrin, General Shafir, General Gavish, thank you all. This has been Israel at War, an update. We will be back with another edition on TV7 Israel News tomorrow. For the time being, shalom from Jerusalem.
My name is Doron Gavish, and my background, 30 years of serving in the Israeli Air Force. My last job, I was the commander of the Israeli Air and Missile Defense during the introduction of the Iron Dome to the defense of Israel. All of this allows me really to be part of the team here in TV7. It is super important to have such a platform. We talk about the global situation, we talk about Israel and those different angles which are relevant to the discussion.